the poll and share the results with you. So let's see, where are you dialing in from? I see the majority of the people are dialing in from Bangladesh. So welcome everyone, Assalamu alaikum. I see there are quite some people as well from, let's see, Indonesia, other countries. I'm curious to know what those are as well. Please feel free to put it in the chat if you're from another country. I also see some people from Vietnam, then India, some from Europe, and a few percentages from other countries. So, but the majority of you are from Bangladesh. I'm very happy to have you all on the board. Majority of you are working for a manufacturer as well, almost 90%. So that's really a lot. So that really means that only 1 out of 10 people on this call is not working for a manufacturer. Most of you are beginners as well, I see. 70% of the people have not worked with the data collection tool yet, so that we will definitely take in when we are going through the content. Some have a little bit of experience, but almost no one feels he or she is an expert. That's only 2%. Is there life on other planets? The majority of you say, I have no idea, about half. So 50% does not know, but then 40% says, yes, it must be possible. Okay, that gives us a bit of an idea of who you are. Thank you so much for that. And that means that we can also get started with the content. As I saw that many of you are beginners, I will take a little bit of time in this introduction of SLCP to take you through the basics, so to say. So who are we? What is the Social and Labor Convergence Program? You may have heard about it through various ways. You've been invited to this webinar, but maybe it's good to clearly explain what it is and what we do. So we are a multi-stakeholder initiative. That means that we have many what we call signatories, so organizations that believe in what we want to achieve. There are over 200 signatories at the moment, and what they believe in is our mission. So what we want is to have basically one tool, one process to measure working conditions within a facility, and to have that set of data easily be shared between different stakeholders, so that there's no need anymore for duplicative audits. At the moment, many of you have to deal with multiple social compliance audits. We've heard as many as one per month in a facility, 4 different brand partners, 4 different standard holders. Let's just have one what we call the Converge assessment framework, and let that tool be the tool that can be used to measure working conditions. Let's do that only once a year, so a Converge assessment that we can all act on, collaborative action. So what I will take you through together with my guest speakers in this webinar is the first step in the SLCP process, and that is the one of data collection. So as you can see, that Converge assessment framework that I just spoke about has 3 elements. One is the data collection tool, but then there's also a verification protocol, as well as guidance documents. These 3 different items, I should say, are used for the 3 stages of the assessment process. So the first stage is the data collection. In this webinar. Then there's also verification of data, that is the topic of our next webinar next week. And then there's the sharing of data, the verified data set, which is the topic of our final webinar 2 weeks from now. So the end of the assessment process, there is a what we call verified assessment report that contains all the information from a facility on the working conditions in a facility, without coming to any judgment on that data. So I always like to give the example of a room that has a number of tables, and with the SLCP assessment process, we look at how many tables are in that room. So let's say there could be 5 tables, then the answer is 5. And the answer is never that there are enough tables, too few tables, or too many tables. The answer is simply 5, and that is a number that can be shared with different stakeholders. So just objective data about the working conditions within the facility. Yes. So there are already many manufacturers that are using SLCP. Here on the screen you just see a few of them. You will recognize Gopal's export from Ashoka, who will speak about his experience in a minute. But apart from these manufacturers, it's good to know that just any facility that wishes to participate in SLCP is free to register on the gateway and to start the SLCP assessment process. I want to share one experience with you from one of the manufacturers that you see here. They just wanted to indicate and to give an example of how the SLCP assessment process and the data collection tool and the verification methodology help them in reducing audit fatigue. So they mentioned in 2019 that they did 7 SLCP assessments and had those assessments verified in 3 facilities in China and 4 in Sri Lanka. And 30% of their buyers were willing to accept the data, the verified data that came out of the SLCP assessment process. So instead of having to do an audit for 30% of their buyers, they could just share the SLCP verified data with them. So they believe that saved them around 20 unnecessary audits. And they were looking last year to save more, to have a saving of around 30 audits by rolling it out as well in their facilities in Mauritius and Malaysia. So they really feel that if more and more customers will accept an SLCP verified data set, that means that they will have to do less and less social audits and can really focus on things that matter more, like training and improvement. So this was just one example I wanted to share with you. Again, you will hear more from Ashoka later on. But I also wanted to share with you the brands that are currently already accepting SLCP verified data. You see them here on the screen, they're brands. There's some standard holders as well. We're having a lot of conversations with standard holders as well that they can work with SLCP verified data. But for now, I would like to give the word to Kieran from H&M to give an example of how H&M integrated SLCP in their social compliance program and how it also helps them and how they're rolling it out this year in their own supply chain. So Kieran, would like to give you the word here to explain a bit about H&M.
Thank you, Sharon. I think I'll start a little bit from where I started my sustainability career. When I used to visit factories, like I joined in H&M 17 years back, and when we used to visit factories for audits, we used to collect right from the document check verifications and all. The common challenge what we usually hear from members of us is there is a lot of audit fatigue, and then it's basically almost the same how the brands and the other buyers were trying to look at if compliance is met in practice or not. I mean, at the same time, we also wanted to address the materiality issues in the countries, not as individual points, but then collectively how do we take those steps. So that's the reason why H&M strongly believes that SLCP is a solution to that long-standing problem in the apparel and footwear sector, which actually reduces the duplication of the social audits. And that should also not take or drain resources and create audit fatigue in the factories. Rather, what we want to do is spend those resources in developing capacities in the factories. So I think a sort of Our way forward is to create that collaboration and work towards improvement of working conditions in the factories. So for this reason, H&M has committed to fully adopt SLCP where possible, and that we plan to do it within our supply chain by 2022. So to go a little bit explain on how we work in our production markets where we have our production for H&M. We have different teams working in the supply chain, where there is a team we call it as market in which we go to the next slide show on for market development and innovation. So this is a production where we have in 3 continents. We have production offices, 50 production offices, and around 730 suppliers in these 3 continents, where we have 2,300 employees working there. So all these 2,300 employees are in the production are in 4 different areas where we start the market innovation and development. We have business governance, stakeholder and public engagement team, as well as country operations team. So that's how we split it, but most importantly, what we see, you can go to the next slide here. How we see it is, I can just take it a few more times. Yes, how we see it is business governance and intelligence is more strictly internal and external. Business governance, data intelligence, and performance management, and at the same time, what market development and innovation has to do is to secure a fair, circular, and traceable sourcing platform to sustainable capacity development. So that is where we wanted to actually spend most of our resources on, where we get the data from, for example, like SLCP. We see what are the things that we need to work on through analysis, and based on that we create roadmaps. So the data collection tool from SLCP helps us create roadmaps and strategies and how we work in the area of your business. Click the next slide. So in brief, this is what our sustainability ambition is. Our vision is to lead the change towards circular and renewable fashion while being a fair and equal company. So then we have different areas of focus. We go on social as well as on environment, starting from industrial relations, wages, inclusion and diversity, health and safety on the social part, as well as when we talk about environment, climate, chemicals, water, waste, and sustainable materials. So all this is our vision, and then based on how we work together with FAM and SLM, that's how we create our capacity building programs. I get comments on which share the voice is not clear. I'm trying to be as loud as possible. Could be some problem with my connection, maybe that helps. Okay, if we go to the next slide, and how we do is the business governance team actually is the one responsible for data handling, calculations, KPIs, and we have a sustainability index. We ensure minimum requirements are met through this team and track performance and outcome of the programs. And how the market innovation and capacity development team is organized is to secure mature management systems, functioning grievance system, for example, and implement existing programs. And we also have the stakeholder engagement and where when we see there is a need for material leadership issues to be addressed, or in terms of policy change, that's where we work with that team. But to conclude, on the next slide, how we want to Firstly is we have, I think we can skip this one because this we have already covered sharing. So looking forward, we have what we feel is suppliers own the compliance and the processes of the data and the conditions in the factories and the knowledge, and there is no one else in the world who knows best about the factories. You are the one who knows everything about the factories. So that's where the knowledge lies in, and then we want suppliers to take that ownership. And using the data, what we would want to do is to align with what really matters and work on joint remediation. So where we spend less resources in doing the compliance work, but then spend more resources to bring the actual change in the industry. And that we can only do through collaboration and partnerships. I stop there, and if I have any questions, I can show you the Q&A box, and then we can take. Over to you, Sharon. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that, Kieran. And we are seeing in the chat that some people are indicating that there are some problems with the sound, and others are saying there's no problem at all. So I suggest that if you have trouble hearing, try adjusting the sound settings on your own computer, and that should probably do the trick. And for now, we have made it to the end, let's see, of our first section, and we would like to really understand if you actually have a good understanding of, let's say, the SLCP basics. So we would like to see if there's anything that we need to explain better or more, and that's why we are checking in with you. So please, on your screen, can you state whether something is true or false? So SLCP aims to reduce audit fatigue. Is that true or false? Do you have over 40 branches committed to replacing their own audit with the SLCP assessment process? Is that true or false? And does the SLCP assessment process result in a score regarding your facility's social labor conditions? Is that true or false? And whether or not the SLCP assessment process has 2 stages. So that would be to collect data and then to share that data. So I'm seeing that many of you are already filling it in, and I will just leave it for a minute or so and then come back to you with the results. In the meantime, let me make use of this time to ask all of you to include your questions in the Q&A. It's only in the Q&A that we can answer them, that everyone can see the answer and everyone can learn from it. The chat, please do not use the chat. We use the chat to communicate between panelists, so it's really helpful if you don't use the chat, but just stick to the Q&A. So any question that you may have, just put it in the Q&A, and one of my colleagues will alert me to the frequently asked questions so we can address them here in the call. I was alerted that people were asking where is SLCP available and when is it, for example, available in Pakistan. We will launch in Pakistan in May, so the 26th of May is the to be confirmed date for launch in Pakistan together with Pakistan Buyers Forum. And in all the other countries where we're currently already available, which is over 50, you can go to gateway.slconvergence.org to see the list of countries where we are already available. So I see that most of you have voted, so let me close the poll and share the results with you. So let's see, SLCP aims to reduce audit fatigue. Of course, that is true, and I am happy to see that 97% of you said that's true as well. We really hope that with our tool and with our system, we can come to a verified set of data that can be shared with all the brands, with standard holders, and that there's no need anymore for individual social compliance audits. So that's how we aim to reduce audit fatigue. It is also true, indeed, that over 40 brands have committed to replacing their own audits with SLCP. So I'm happy to see that 94% of you already knew this, but to the 6% that didn't yet, not all those brands currently can already accept SLCP verified data. They have to adjust their system to be able to work with the data, but they are committed to it. And the list that I showed you earlier are the brands that are already able to accept SLCP verified data. I see that on the third one I need to explain a little bit more, because the SLCP assessment process does not result in a score. But at the end of the process, what you have is a set of data that accurately represents the social and labor conditions in your facility. So the example I gave earlier, it says, for example, how many tables are in a room. That's the example I mentioned. But you can also think of how many fire extinguishers are in a facility. But also questions about what is the average wage? Are wages paid according to legal requirements, etc. So there are questions related to requirements, only legal requirements, but there's never a score at the end. So there's never you pass or you fail, there's just objective information about emissions in your facility. Also, for the last statement, so there are two stages to the SLCP assessment process: to collect data and to share data. You said 50-50, so 50% of you said it's true and 50% it's false. Well, it is false. And why? Because there are three stages. The first stage is a self-assessment by the facility. So a facility collects data themselves on their social and labor conditions in their facility. The second step is the verification of the data by an external party. And then the third step is then the sharing of that verified set of data.
সাউন্ড অফ করে দিচ্ছি, আগে সাউন্ড অন ছিল। যেহেতু আমাদের কোনো পার্টিসিপেশন নাই, এর জন্য সাউন্ড লাইক আ
So that was this quick check-in. Again, if things are not clear yet, please use the Q&A and one of my colleagues will help you with the answer there. So now that we've got the basics of the SLCP, we would like to go into the SLCP assessment process. So the assessment process, what does it look like? And I'm talking about the first step in the process here, which is the self-assessment. So I mentioned this, the facility starts in the SLCP assessment process by themselves filling in the information in the data collection tool, and that is different from what happens during a social compliance audit. Because at a social compliance audit, somebody goes into a facility, just checks all the different conditions, fills that in a report, and then all the data is there. So why did we decide in the SLCP assessment process to have a first step before someone coming into the facility and collecting the data, and having a facility collect data themselves? So why did we decide on this first step? So for this, I'm mentioning the whole time to go to the Q&A. For this, you can go to the chat and you can fill in what you think is the reason that we have a first step in the SLCP assessment process. So why do you think that we chose to have the facility do a self-assessment first before somebody to come in? I see somebody saying in the chat to save time. I'm curious why to save time, because you would say it takes extra time. As a facility, you have to do the self-assessment first. There's not somebody coming in to just collect it for you. Any other reasons? So please put that in the chat. I also see here, it is better to give responsibility to the facility. Okay. I also see to collect all the data in one place for the verifier, so the verifier can check the data easily, and that saves time. Okay, I'm seeing more coming in, so please feel free to put your answer in the chat. Giving ownership to the facility, getting ready for the audit. Self-assessment is a good way to increase facility ownership. So more about facility ownership. You need to know what's going on in your facility before having third-party verification, to become aware of points to improve, to evaluate your own facility, to understand well where we stand with respect to social compliance, mapping your own risk. What else do I see? A lot of information to add value to the process, to identify gaps. Okay, I see a lot of good answers coming in on the chat. So let me help you indeed with giving me the answer. So at present, when we think about social compliance audits, the facility is subject to an audit. So that means that as a facility, someone comes into your facility, writes down what the conditions are within your facility, and then walks away with that information. So the one that holds that information and afterwards is either the brand or the standard holder that asked for the audit in the first place. Within SLCP, as many of you mentioned in the chat as well, we say the facility needs to own the process. So you start it, and you also own the data at the end. You know what's going on, because you are the one filling in the answers to all the questions in the data collection tool, so that indeed you can also identify what are gaps, perhaps in social compliance, and where can you take improvement actions, and where do business opportunities lie for further improvement. So indeed, a lot of the answers that came in the chat are point on. So it's really a big part of it is ownership. You know what's going on in your facility, and you will be able to act on it together with your brand partner or with the standard holder, instead of them owning your data and deciding what needs to happen or not. So that is the reason why we decided on this three-stage assessment process, and it starts with data collection by the facility. So I mentioned it enables ownership, we understand the condition in your facility, and it lays a strong foundation for improvement plans. So what is then required in this first step of the assessment process? So when you do data collection. Well, here we see choose an AH stands for accredited host platform to fill in the data collection tool. So it's an online platform where you fill in the data collection tool. Then you have to include different people from different departments to complete the 2 questions. It's not one person alone that can go through the data collection tool and answer all of the questions. Next, you need to have a verification completed within 2 months of submitting the facility's data. So within 2 months, somebody has to come to your facility to check the correctness of the data, to make some corrections, and to come to a verified set of data. So don't worry, we will go through this in more detail in the next slides, but know that it is the data collection tool that you will use for all of this. So it is developed to cover all the usual social compliance topics, as well as management systems, and to give the opportunity to show best practices as well. Again, as mentioned, the idea is that it replaces all proprietary social audits, so there's no need for all these individual social compliance audits anymore. As promised, what I will do now is take you through these 3 different items, so to choose an accredited host platform, to include people from different departments, and to complete it within 2 months. First of all, you have 2 what we call accredited hosts. One is HIG, and the other one is Fair Factories Clearinghouse. These are the two platforms on which you can fill in the data collection tool. So as a facility, it's these platforms that you will use to fill in the data collection tool. I saw many questions coming in on HIG. HIG has FSLM, and the question is, what is the difference between FSLM and SLCP? Well, as you know, HIG does include scoring. So HIG, as an accredited host, offers, let's say, services on top of the SLCP assessment process. So the FSLM makes use of our data collection tool, the SLCP data collection tool. You can fill that in HIG FSLM. So HIG FSLM is basically the SLCP data collection tool. The FSLM is the verification of that data. So it's stage 2 of our assessment process. And then at the end, you can share your data through HIG with, for example, scoring. So that is an added service of HIG. So when we talk about FSLM, VFSLM, and SLCP, we can say that SLCP is the backbone to HIG, and HIG offers additional services. Fair Factory Clearinghouse, on the other hand, offers other services, for example, a comparison with a brand's code of conduct. But let me start simple here. So if you want to fill in the data collection tool, you can go either to HIG or Fair Factory's Clearinghouse to fill in the tool online. We also know that for some facilities it's easier to fill in the tool offline. So if you want to do that, that's okay. You can download the offline Excel tool from these platforms, fill it in, and then upload it back onto the accredited host platform. What's very important to remember is that you only fill in the tool once. So you choose either HIG or Fair Factory Clearinghouse, and at the end of the process, when you finish the data collection tool, when all the data is inserted, and you have your verification done, you can share your verified data from one platform to the other. So there is no need to fill in the SLCP data collection tool on both accredited hosts. You just pick one, that's where you fill it in, that's where you go through the whole assessment process, and then you share that data from one to another. So that's the first step, choosing the platform where you want to fill in the data. This is what it looks like on Fair Factory's Clearinghouse, FOC. You go to that platform, you click to start a new assessment, and then you can start it online, and as mentioned, download it for the offline tool and upload it. On HIG, this is what it looks like. So you have your FSLM dashboard. You go to the overview, and you can also download the offline tool there, which you can also start it online. So these are the two different platforms. I also mentioned that you need different people to fill in the data collection tool. So it's not just one social compliance manager, for example, that can fill it in. You really need to have people from HR, human resources, from safety, from the management team to be able to answer all of the different questions. There's also involvement needed from workers and union representatives, and we have guidance on how to do this. So you, when looking at the questions in the data collection tool, go back 12 months. I've heard the question so often, what do I do if my facility is not 1 year old? Well, for the SLCP assessment, you need at least 3 months of data. So that means that your facility has to be at least 3 months old to be able to fill in the questions in the data collection tool. And as mentioned, the tool is slightly larger than a regular audit because more questions are asked. So it will take you around 2 weeks to complete the assessment, to get all the people together, to get all the documentation, and to find all the answers to the questions. So do take your time for this. It will take a bit more time if you do it for the first time than if you do it for the second time. So Shelper can also give you a bit of information about that. but it takes around 2 weeks if you want to do it well. So if you fill in the tool online on the Accredited Host platform, or you fill it offline and then you upload it back onto the Accredited Host platform, know that there will always be some checks. The Accredited Host checks will make sure that all the data that's inserted is correct. So for example, that all of the answers are given in English. Also that you haven't left any questions blank that are meant to be answered. Overall, you have to have at least 95% of questions answered, up to 100%. But we allow for a few percentages not to be answered, as you may not know the answer to the question or cannot interpret the question. So, also necessary a check on the accredited host is the number of characters that are included, so there are a maximum of 1,000 in the free text field, and there are also questions that need to be answered with numbers or dates, so the accredited host will check that as well. I mentioned before, so you on the accredited host system, when you submit your data, within 2 months you have to have that data verified. Because of course, if you take longer, then the data that you filled in might not be accurate anymore, and the verifier will have to correct a lot of the answers. You have to select the verifier body on the accredited host system as well. And they will then, after being assigned, have a look at your facility's data and prepare for the on-site verification. So that needs to take place within 2 weeks. So that's the process on the accredited host. I introduced some new terms to you, some new platforms. So let me check in again to see if it was all clear what I explained. So again, there's a poll on your screen. You can fill in your answers, whether you believe something is true or false. Feel free to already give your answer. The first question or statement is that the facility completes the data collection tool in the accredited host. The second statement is the facility needs to fill in the data collection tool on all the accredited host platforms. Then the third one is the data collection tool must be downloaded from the gateway to start an SLCP assessment. The fourth statement, facility data is based on 12 months of recent data on social and labor conditions. And then the fifth statement, all self-assessed data is verified before it can be shared. So feel free to fill in your answers. Now you've got the hang of it. I will just give it a minute before I come back to you with the answers.
The data collection tool must be downloaded from Dhaka. So the data is based on all services is verified before it can be shared.
Okay, I see most of the answers came in. Some of you are still voting, but let me close the poll in 10 seconds, and then we'll go through the answers. So your final guesses on the statements, please go ahead, and then we'll address them. I'm now ending the poll and sharing the results with you. So let's see. On the first statement, a facility completes the data collection tool on an accredited host. That is indeed correct. So I see 90% of you gave that answer as well. Do know for the 10% that didn't, the accredited hosts are the platforms that I mentioned earlier. So HIG and FFC are what we call accredited hosts, and that is where you fill in the data collection tool. The facility does not need to fill in the data collection tool on both of these platforms, so on HIG and FFC. You choose one, so either HIG or FFC, and that's where you fill in the data collection tool. At the end of the SLCP assessment process, you can easily share the data from one platform to the other. So for example, if you have a brand partner that is using HIG to access your verified data, and you have another brand partner that uses FFC to access your verified data, you as a facility can choose which accredited host you want to use for the collection of your data, and then at the end of the process you can simply share it with the other accredited host to satisfy both your brand partner's needs. So just pick one, and at the end you can share. Then on the third statement, the data collection tool must be downloaded from the gateway to start an SLCP assessment. This is false, and I saw that 53% of you had that correct, but 47% thought that you did have to go to the gateway. So the gateway, I haven't mentioned the gateway yet, and we will really go into the gateway in our third facility training webinar in 2 weeks' time. But just briefly, it is our main platform of SLCP where all verified assessments are stored on a UN server in Geneva. But it is not the start of the SLCP assessment for filling in the data collection tool. You can download the data collection tool for training purposes on the gateway, but if you want to start your SLCP assessment, you have to go to either HIG or FFC. So I hope that's clear. Then the fourth statement, facility data is based on 12 months of recent data on social and labor conditions. That is true, and I see that 92% of you have that correct. A lot of you asked as well, what do I do if my data, if I fill in my data and I don't have my verification within 2 months' time? Well then, we advise you go back into your assessment, so you open the data collection tool again, and you adjust the data to make sure that it accurately reflects your current conditions, change the date that you submit your assessment, and then request verification. So you have to go back into the tool, check your answers, adjust the date, the submitted date, to be able to have the verification done. The verification really needs to happen within 2 months of finalizing your self-assessment. Then on the final statement, all self-assessed data is verified before it is shared. That is indeed true. Most of you said that as well, 76%, but still 24% said it's false. But really, no self-assessed data can be shared unless an outside party, a third party verifier, came in, checked the correctness of the data, and then only then it can be shared with your brand partners, for example, or with standards. So let me quickly check in here with my colleagues and see if there's any other question that I should be addressing. I believe not. So again, use the Q&A for all of your questions, and my colleagues will tell me if the question is asked multiple times, so then I will address it live as well. So to continue on, I already said it before, we have a lot of content today, and I'm now going into the content of the data collection tool. So I mentioned that within SLCP we have a three-phase assessment process. The first phase is that there is data collection, so a self-assessment of the facility. But what is it then that's asked of you? What are the tool questions? So in this part I will briefly touch on that. So when we look at the tool, we can see that there are all these questions that cover social compliance topics. So a lot of questions related to international labour standards as well as national labour laws. We say that's the basis of social compliance, what the law says and what international labour standards require. And then there are also social labour compliance questions that are less critical. So those can be the ones that are found in many codes of conduct, French code of conduct, for example, or social compliance standards. As well as questions related to management systems. So what are the management systems that are in place to ensure good working conditions within the facility? And then I mentioned before as well that there is the option to show best practices, so we call that above and beyond, and in that section a facility can indicate what kind of extra things that they are doing. So the logic that we find in the tool is that we address all of these topics by following the worker's life cycle. So that starts, of course, with recruitment and hiring. Somebody comes on board in your facility. Then how many hours do they work, the working hours, what are they paid, so wages and benefits, how they treated, worker treatment, worker involvement, and then health and safety until termination. So termination of the contract of the worker in your facility. So that's the logic of the tool and the content of the tool. And let me here give you a bit of an overview in more specifics of these different topics. Because within the tool you actually have an option. You have an option to choose which step you would like to answer in the tool. And as you can see from the circle on the top right of the screen, basically every step that you go higher has more questions than the previous step. So if we look at step 1, if you choose to only answer step 1 questions, then you're only looking at the essential questions. So those are all the questions in the tool related to international labour standards as well as national labour laws. So this is really the bare basic of the tool. If you say, I want to answer as well a lot of questions related to codes of conduct and social labour standards, then you should go for step 2, progressive. Because in here, there are a lot of questions as well that are not essential, so not related to international labour standards and national labour laws, but are often desired by brands that have these questions in their codes of conduct. And then as mentioned, the third step has a lot of questions that show best practices, such as workplace well-being as well as community impact. So when starting your assessment, this is the first choice you make. As a facility, do I want to answer only step 1 questions, step 2 questions, or step 3 questions? I have an overview as well of what the different topics are under these different steps. I will just briefly show it to you, but this is a good moment to mention as well that the slides, as well as the recording of this webinar, will be available on our help desk. So if you go to slconvergence.org/helpdesk, you will be able to find the recording as well as the slides of this webinar. We will send each and every one of you a follow-up email as well with a link to the documents. So just to quickly show you this and not go through it, because I said you can have a look at the slides later. In step 1, you will see that they're all here, the international labour standards, national labour laws, all the legally important topics. In step 2, you see additional topics are included that are often linked to code of conduct as well as social labor standards. And you will see management system questions in this step as well. And then the third step, that is where you see a lot of questions being included about best practices related to workplace well-being as well as community impact. So how do you choose a step then? Okay, I have these options, step 1, step 2, step 3, but what should I do when? Well, we do have some tips here. So the first tip would be look at the relationship with your buyer. So who do you want to share this data with? As mentioned, step 1 data does not include a lot of questions that are asked in social industry standards or codes of conduct. So if you're planning to share your data with a lot of different buyers and perhaps certain standards as well, we advise that you go for step 2. If you're only looking for legal requirements, then step 1 will provide you with all the information that's needed. So then there's no need to go for step 2 or 3. Also, if you are a small facility, it may help to start with step 1, because it means that there are a lot less questions to answer, it's a lot simpler to navigate the tool, so it might be of your benefit to choose step 1. And then for larger facilities, mostly that have a high ambition level and want to show all of their potential new partners, business partners, what they are doing, then it makes sense to choose step 3 because it gives you the opportunity to show all these best practices that you've been working on. So that's just some information about the step selection and the different steps that we have. Let me take a little break here and introduce you again to Ashoka, who can share a lot of experience from being a facility and going through the SLCP process that might be very helpful for you when you want to embark on your SLCP journey. So Ashoka, please unmute yourself and turn on your camera to share your knowledge with the audience.
Thank you, Sharon. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Ashok, working as a senior compliance manager, Gokul Das Exports. Before I start, I will tell you about my organization, which I represent. Gokul Das Exports is started in 1979. We have 15 facilities around Karnataka and one in Andhra Pradesh. So we have 15 plus buyers in our working with Gokul Das Exports. So we started 1979 and I am also working with 25 years. We have seen a lot of audits like certification audits, buyer audits, third party audits like certification audit SA8000, RAP, Meta, FedEx, and in between they came 2 or 3 buyers collaborated. They are asking and internally we share. So to cut down audit fatigue, process 5 years back, 5 years, 6 years back, that is also changed now and very very started their own audits. Now the SLCP will help us to cut down this audit fatigue, and we have out of 15 facilities we started our can we go next slide? 2019, as soon as the inauguration 2019 with Bangalore SLCP started in collaboration with Shahi, we started SLCP implementing one of our manufacturing facilities, and the same has been verified by second party buyer, which we started in the pilot as a pilot. It was a great opportunity and has helped us to enhance our knowledge implementing towards SLCP and along with our required management system at the facilities. Next step. This is all our process owners and manufacturing units. We are just we have shared this tool before going to implement, and training has been conducted at our facility level to go with these SLCP audits. We started self-assessment at various our factories with third-party verification companies like ITS, Elevate, etc. In 2020, we have 6 verified assessments out of 15 facilities. So just we forwarded to go with a new version of 1.4, where more than one brand was expecting our verified in each facilities out of 6 facilities. Next slide. SLCP enhanced our knowledge of global standards, where all the various 40 plus brand standards have been incorporated in the tools, and to fulfill the requirements of all 40 plus brands, SLCP has enhanced our knowledge into global standards. Most of our brands partners expect SLCP third-party verified report, and use of SLCP framework elements requirement of multiple audits by various brands, which results in the audit strategy which is already proved. In all SLCP procedures and documents are standardized for uniform implementation. Our manufacturing units can now focus on core areas for continual improvements, where we are lacking with as per the tools, and we can plan and implement for the future development of our manufacturing units. With SLCP score or accredited cost legal, we can continuously improve our performance, getting target oriented, and implement management system and sustainability, and then we can try a roadmap about success and setting up our target sustainability. Next slide. In summary, Gokul's export started again 2019, and the phone tool contentful is very helpful. Even the tool which we are previously working with H&M, where step the similar questions, and other brands audits and all, where we working with us similar, all are incorporated with 40 plus brands requirement. So it was very helpful to several clients SLCP signature is that aspect of our SLCP verified data. And even in COVID pandemic situations, whereas brand and third party audit has been restricted to enter into the factory premises, there we have our existing SLCP verified data we have shared, and for the year 2020, out of all over major brands has been expected the SLCP reports. And it's become knowledgeable, increase our understanding about working condition in the facilities as a self-assessment tool. So we are very well known that where we are the working condition, what is our target about it. So better information to formulate our goals and define our roadmaps about coming years, where do we achieve sustainability. Next slide.
Thank you so much for all that information, Ashoka. That was really helpful in understanding your perspective from a facility. I was thinking this is a good moment to take a little break for everyone. So just to take 5 minutes for a quick stop to the restroom, or to get a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and then we'll be back in 5 minutes. So thank you again, Ashoka, and everyone feel very free to include your questions, continue to include your questions in the Q&A. We will address them there, and we will also address some of the questions live that come up multiple times. So talk to you in 5 minutes again. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you had the opportunity to quickly use the restroom and to pick yourself an extra cup of coffee or tea. We will continue on with content. I know it's a lot, and we're seeing that by the questions that are coming in. My colleagues informed me that we already had 120 questions answered, so a lot of questions are being asked. Some of those questions are as well on the accredited host platforms. And I think it's good to be aware that in 2 weeks' time, so not next Monday, but the Monday after, we actually have a facility training webinar on the accredited host platform. So how does everything work on the tech platforms? Today we focus on the data collection tool. So we will dedicate most of the time to that. If you still feel you have questions on HIG or FFC, for example, please join the session in 2 weeks' time. There is one question that came up. We mentioned the steps just now, so choosing step 1, 2, or 3. And a question came up, what do you do if you chose a step in the beginning, but then want to change your step, for example, for the verification? Do know that don't take this decision on step lightly, because afterwards it's very difficult to change the steps that you want to include in your data collection tool. The verification always has to include all the steps that you chose, all the questions that you have answered in the data collection tool during the self-assessment. You cannot, for example, for the verification, do less questions than that you answered in the data collection tool. So if you chose step 1, for example, you cannot have verification on the first step 1. Am I seeing that correctly? So if you choose step 2, we answer all the questions in step 2 for the self-assessment, you cannot have verification just for step 1, for example. So choose your steps wisely in the beginning. So let us now continue, and let's have a look at the offline tool and how to navigate that. So we went through SLCP, who we are, we went through the different stages of the assessment process, we zoomed in on the first phase, which is the self-assessment, using the data collection tool, choosing your step, and then, as mentioned, you have to go to an accredited host to start your assessment. You can fill in the data online, but you can also choose to fill it in offline. So you download the tool from the accredited host, and then you navigate the offline tool. So I will take you through the offline tool right now. Again, we focus on the accredited host platforms in a webinar 2 weeks from now, but for now, it's the offline tool that we will be navigating. So to start, when you have downloaded the Excel file from the accredited host, how do you open the data collection tool? So here it's very important that you always open the tool in Microsoft Excel. It's an Excel file, so really open it in Microsoft Excel. Don't have other Excel files open at the same time to avoid the tool from crashing, for example. So that means that you have to close all the Excel files that are already open, close in large application, and then just open it fresh the tool in Excel. When opening the tool, you have to enable the content and enable macros. The tool does a lot of thinking on its own, so for example, there are additional questions, when you choose a step, the questions appear and do not appear. So all this thinking that happens in the tool can only happen if you enable the content and enable the macros. So when you have it open then, and you've enabled the content and the macros, you see 3 different tabs. The first tab gives you an overview of the important information on the tool. So including how to enable those macros as well as our terms of use. The second tab with instructions gives you instructions on how to open the tool, orientate yourself, fill in the required content, as well as some other tips. So have a look at those 2 tabs before you go to the third tab that contains all the questions in the data collection tool. So in the previous version 1.3, some of you may have used you had several tabs for each and every section of the tool, but in the new data collection tool version 1.4, you will find all the questions together in one sheet. So this is a very important change. For all other changes, by the way, so I won't be going through all the different changes from 1.3 to 1.4, I just focus on what 1.4 looks like. But if you want to know more about the changes from 1.3 to 1.4, then you can always go to our help desk, so slconvergence.org/helpdesk, and you can find an FAQ there that really explains the differences from 1.3 to 1.4. We can include this FAQ in our follow-up email. But going back to the data collection tool 1.4. So if you go to that sheet that contains all the questions, here you see you are in the facility profile first, where you will choose your step. So the steps that we just discussed. Either step 1, essential, step 2, progressive, or step 3, advanced. So these are, this is the first choice that you will make, and that will actually open up, let's say, the questions within the tool. So what you will see is that when you choose step 1, you will only see questions in these sections that are highlighted now on the screen. So in step 1 essential, you will see the facility profile, recruitment and hiring, working hours, wages and benefits, worker treatment, worker involvement, health and safety, as well as termination. Questions in those sections. However, in the facility profile, if you choose to go for step 2, then you will see that the management system questions will also become available, as well as other questions in the other sections of the tool. If you choose to go for step 3, then you will find all the different sections available to you and a lot of questions open in the tool. So that's the first choice, in the facility profile, to choose your step. As you can see, so here, step selection, and then choose your step. I already mentioned it before. When you choose a step, that is also the step that will be verified. So choose your step wisely. Then, you could also see that before those different sections, there's a percentage. At the moment, this percentage is really low. So you can see most of the percentages are 0, and then in the facility profile, there's 1.18%. In front of those sections, the percentages, they give you an indication of the completion of each section of the tool. So in total, on the right side of the screen, you see a big bar that's currently pink, so it means most of it is incomplete. But while you complete the different sections of the tool, this bar will go up and you will see your completion percentage for the full tool. So as mentioned, you need to have at least 95% completed of the tool in total to be able to submit your data. Also, what you can find on top of the screen is where you are in the tool. So at the moment, as you can see, you are in the section working hours. And within the section working hours, you are on records. So the subsection working hours and then in records. So it really helps you to navigate the tool. For each and every section, there will be section instructions. So it tells you what kind of questions you will find and what kind of topics. And there will be some additional information as well about the subsection you are in, including some information about ILO or conventions. So that means that you can reference these while you are filling in the two questions. I already mentioned this, but on the top right, you also get an indication of the completion percentage of the tool, and you have to get to 95% to be able to upload the tool back on the accredited host document and submit the data. So then about the questions. When you are in the section, at the moment we are in recruitment and hiring, child labor and age documentation. So here you see the questions related to that category. So for example, all the questions have numbers, so this one is RH and CHI1, and that question is about age documentation. So then it is, does the facility verify minimum age requirements prior to hiring members? So what you see, behind every question you have an info box or an info choice. You can click on this to get additional information that will help both the facility as well as the verifier to come to a response. Because the response is what you give in this final column that you see here, and you always have to give that response in English. So I mentioned this before, you cannot give a response in another language. We do have the tool available in simplified Chinese as well, but still the facility answers, the facility responses always need to be in English. What are these answer options? So what can you answer on each and every question? So there are sometimes the possibility of a drop down, so you can simply say yes or no. There's also free text field sometimes. I mentioned that there's a max 1,000 character limit to filling in your answer. And again, the answer has to be in English. And then there's also the option of giving a number. So when it says number here, it's not possible to, for example, write 200. You really need to type a number in. So this is a check on the imperative choice as well. Looking ahead, what are other answer options? So sometimes it's the selection of an X, and an X just indicates what is applicable. So if something is applicable, you select the X. If not, you leave it empty. Sometimes there's a date here that can be answered, so then you have to do that in the appropriate format. So first the year, then the months, and then the days. So those are the different options that you have in the facility response field. So as mentioned, it all has to be in English, but as you can see there, the answer options are often there for you, so that makes it quite easy to fill in also. So when going back to the tool itself, and for example the info box and the kind of information that you will get there, you will see that a pop-up box appears when you click on info. So that pop-up box gives you information on how to interpret the question, and that will also help you with how to answer the question. So if you're unsure, know that each and every question has an info box, and you can always get more information on how to answer a question. So also here, know that often when there are references to the law, that it's good to include as well the reference to your national law in the response. We sometimes have more information about this available, so it will be available through our collaboration with ILO Better Work for Bangladesh, Indonesia and Vietnam first. So that means that when you click on more info, that you will have more information about the specific legal requirements within a country. But note that this net will initially only be available for Bangladesh, Indonesia and Vietnam, and will come for other countries at a later time. So let me tell you a bit about the conditional questions that you have in the tool. So as I mentioned in the beginning, the tool can think, so to say, if you enable the macros. And there are a couple of conditional questions. So that means that if you answer a question in a certain way, another question may open up that wasn't there before. So this is an example, RH CHI2, that is a question. And that question is, what is the age of the youngest worker in the facility? So here the answer is 14. And then you can see that nothing really happens, but if you change the answer to other, then an additional conditional question pops up that says, please describe. So why are you not giving a specific number? Please explain why we are saying other. So these conditional questions, this is just one example, but there are a few of them, not many, not as many as in version 1.3, I should say, but it is important to have a look at these. And this is also, by the way, why sometimes your completion percentage can change a bit. So if a verifier changes the answer, then there are suddenly more conditional questions that need to be answered, and you hadn't answered them, your completion percentage goes down a little bit. Nothing to worry about though. If you have 95% completions the moment you submit, you can really go for the next step, which is verification. So also in version 1.4, the tool version that we will use, we have color coding. So this is also available in version 1.3 and hasn't changed much. So you can see that light gray indicates that an answer is given to a question, and dark gray says that the question still requires an answer. Again, you have to get to a 95% completion, but there are also some questions that really require an answer. So if you haven't answered those, the accredited host will let you know where you haven't answered the question and which questions really require an answer. Then we also found that as we kept the tool simple and we have these answer options often already laid out for you, that sometimes the facility would like to explain a little bit more. So at the end of every section, so I mentioned the section before, let me go back to show you. So if you are, for example, in recruitment and hiring, or here in worker involvement, at the end of the section, you will have the opportunity to give some additional comments. So, for example, when you found a certain question not in line with the conditions within your facility, or there's something specific you would like to mention about that, please know that at the end of every section we have a possibility. There's also the possibility to include photographs or documents with each and every question, but do know that all these different documents and photographs that we will upload will be available at the end in the verified assessment as well. So everything will be available for example, the brand partner you choose to share your verified data with. So we're saying be very careful with what you're uploading. You can always show the verifier things when they're on site or send them the documentation. You do not have to include it in the tool, because we want to make sure that you don't include any confidential information. We got a question before, what is confidential information? Well, that's really what you see as confidential information, but for example, personal information about your employees, etc., that is really, we really do not recommend to include. So moving on, when looking at the different completion percentages, I mentioned 95 to 100% before you can submit. And to get to that percentage, really remember to save often. In the past, the version 1.3, it could get very heavy and sometimes could suddenly close, making you lose all the answers that you've already given in the tool. 1.4 is improved a lot, has improved a lot, but still this can happen. So remember to save often to make sure that if something happens, you don't lose the answer that you've been given. If you get an error message, so here's some guidance on how to deal with that, then press End in the error message that you're getting, close the error message, close the workbook in its entirety, close Excel in its entirety, and then restart the Excel program to have the workbook opened again and enable more processing. So As mentioned, if you don't save often, you might not find the answers to the questions back in there again after it crashed, so really save often. So that brings us again to a poll to check in with you to see if all that I explained so far made sense to you and you know the answer to these statements. So on your screen, you can click again, you can say whether something is true or false. So regarding the first statement, the facility needs to answer at least 95% to 2 questions before they can submit for verification is that true or false. The second statement, facilities pick one of the following steps to complete. Step 1, step 2, or step 3, is that true or false?
Pick one of the following.
Then statement 3, there are 9 key sections in the tool, and there's a section with general facility profile information, is that true or false? Statement 4, colors help you guide through the off-guide tool, is that correct? And 5, all 2 questions are visible when opening the tool, is that correct or false? So please fill in your answers, and I'll come back to you in a minute with the results.
All the questions are visible when opening.
Okay, I see that most of you have answered the statements, whether they're true or false. I'll give it a couple more seconds, so please fill in your final thoughts, and we will go through each and every one of the statements. Okay, I'm ending the poll, closing it now, and sharing the results with you. So let's see. The facility needs to answer at least 95% of the 2 questions. I think I only mentioned it 10 times, but I'm very happy to hear and to see that most of you have that correct. So 96% that said that's correct, and it is indeed. Also, facilities pick one of the following steps to complete. Step 1 essential, step 2 progressive, or step 3 advanced. Also, this is true, and I see that almost 90% had that correct, so I'm happy to see. We discussed the 3 different steps and how you can choose them, as well as mentioning that the step you choose is also the step that will be verified. The next statement, there are 9 sections in the tool, plus a general facility information section. That is also true, which 80% of you almost said as well, so no need to further explain. Then, statement 4, colors help guide you through the offline tool. Also, that is true, which 82% of you knew as well. But then the final question, or the final statement, all tool questions are visible when opening the tool. A lot of you thought that was true, but it is actually false. And why is it false? Because a couple of reasons. One, first you need to choose the step. If you have chosen a step, then the questions will appear. So when opening the tool, you won't see any questions until you've decided which step you want in the tool. And then when choosing a step, then questions become visible. But they're not even all the questions, because you might have conditional questions as well. And those conditional questions can pop up depending on the answer that you give to a certain question. So no, not all tool questions are visible when opening the tool. You really need to choose your step first, and then perhaps some other conditional questions can make that other questions appear, but also require an answer. So this is important to know. Let's see, I can take a second to address some of the questions that have been coming in on the Q&A. We saw quite a few questions, as always, whether or not we will share the slides and the recording, as well as these polls, for example. Well, the poll questions are in the slide deck, as you can see, and the slide deck, as well as the recording, will be shared on our help desk. So slconvergence.org/helpdesk. That's where you will find a lot of FAQs as well, and a lot of resources. So a lot of your questions will likely be answered there as well. So moving on to the final section, I should say, on really filling in the tool, answering questions to the tool. And for this section, I have my final guest speaker joining me, so Robert from Brand Accessories, to help you with some very practical guidance and tips when filling in the tool and what mistakes not to make. So let me start with some general tips to fill in the tool. So first of all, we as SLCP, I hope that has become clear, really focus on collecting objective and true data on the working conditions in the facility. So just really, let me start with that very basic question again: how many fire extinguishers are in the facility? What is the age of your workers? What's the youngest worker? What kind of wages do you pay, etc. So really to have that objective and true data. The data will be verified, as mentioned, and then what we hope to achieve is that data can then be shared with brands and standard holders, so that there's no need anymore for social compliance, for their own social compliance audits, and we can eliminate audit fatigue and free up and redeploy resources that now go to conducting these audits. To achieve this, that means that in the data collection tool, we only have, let's say, objective answers. So the answer is, for example, number, or yes, or no, but the answer is never enough, or few, or too much. There's never a judgment in the answer to the questions. We leave it up to the end user to come to a conclusion themselves. Also, it's good to be aware that there are a lot of questions in the tool. There are more than in a regular social audit. And that has to be because we want the data to be used for multiple audits. So that does mean that there are quite a few questions. For the ones that know the tool version 1.3, know that there are 30% less questions in tool version 1.4. So the aim is not to have more and more questions in the tool, but rather to have more and more focus, to know what let's say we want to know as an industry regarding social compliance, and to actually make the tool smaller, so that we only focus on what's really necessary. Again, you can help with giving indications to what you think is important and to focus the attention of the verifier by including comments on the facility points. So really important to keep in mind, only fill in objective data accurately reflects the conditions in your facility. That's the kind of data that we look for, and that's the kind of data that we want to share in the end with your business partners. There are some specific legal questions in the tool that I think is good to have some additional guidance on. So I mentioned that the step 1 is mostly focused on international labor standards and national labor laws. So especially that step 1 has a lot of law questions. I also mentioned that sometimes there is guidance available for those law-related questions, because we collaborated with ILO.org, and we call that the law overlay. And that will be available on accredited hosts, so only online on the platform, and initially only for Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Vietnam. But for those legal questions, as you will see, there will be a lot of references to national labor laws as well as international labor standards. So this is just one example. It's a question really in the section working hours, and it says, are all overtime working hours in line with legal limits? It is, of course, possible that in your country there is no legal requirements when it comes to overtime working hours. That is possible because the tool is intended for all countries globally. So what do you answer when it's not applicable for you? Well, know then that here you just fill in the response, no applicable legal requirements. It's part of the drop-down menu, so you'll see it in the drop-down menu, but you can just choose no applicable legal requirements. And as mentioned, if you want to know a little bit more, just always go to more info for more guidance, and sometimes there is more info available when there's a law overlay available for your country. So then here are a couple of questions where we saw mistakes often made. So this is what came up from looking at the different verified assessment report, and where, for example, often the facility answer was changed by the verifier, and it often had to do with the fact that the question is not well received. So let's have a look at a couple of those specific questions. So here is a question that is in wages and benefits. So the question is the facility not paying workers premium pay as legally required based on the worker's competence and or the nature of the work? So what we often saw is that facilities misunderstand the question, and they say yes when they feel they're in line with legal requirements, but the question actually asks if the facility is not paying this. So it's not asking whether or not the facility is in compliance, but it's asking if the facility is not paying this premium. So then when you say yes, I'm not paying that is actually a mistake. So as a facility, if you are paying those premium pays, then you should answer no, because you are indeed paying it. So no, you are not paying it. I hope this makes it clear. But always review the more info guidance for more clarity. Another question, and that question is in recruitment and hiring. So the question is, have race, skin color, sex, gender, religion, political opinion, national extraction, social origin, HIV, AIDS status, sexual orientation, pregnancy, maternity status, marital status, family responsibilities, age, or nationality / foreign migrant worker status been a factor in decision regarding hiring? So So here, what we often see is that the facility feels like, well, we don't discriminate, so that's when they fill in no. Well, this question actually asks, did you consider any of these things when you were hiring? And then the answer, if it was a factor in recruitment, then you have to say yes. So for example, when you do have a minimum working age, and you don't accept workers, let's say under the age of, I'm going to say something 16, then you have to say yes, because we do take that into consideration, age, when recruiting. So this is also very often some mistakes. Then going to working hours, the section of working hours, there's a question, does the facility provide time off for breastfeeding in line with legal requirements? So here, then a facility, when they are actually giving time off for breastfeeding, they just say yes. But there are no applicable legal requirements that require the facility to do so. So then the correct answer should be no. But then when giving this information, so this is for example where you can use the facility comments and say that we actually do give time, but there is no legal requirement for this. So the verifier can also note this in the verification data that you actually give time off for this, but that there are no legal requirements on this. So I've given some of the examples of commonly made mistakes that we saw when we were looking at the verified assessments. But I know that Robert from Randa Accessories has a lot of experience as well as being a verifier body. So Robert, I would like to ask you to share your experience with facilities.
Of course. Hi everyone, my name is Robert Reed and I'm with Randa Accessories. I am based here in Chicago in the United States. And yeah, we're very fortunate to be a part of SLCP. SLCP is very important to us. We manufacture leather goods and the like for over 70 brands, global brands. And so what SLCP is able to do is it helps us to reduce duplicative auditing. So it's greatly reduced the number of audits that our factories have to go through. I know a lot of you are going through the same problem with monthly audits and the like. So SLCP is an opportunity to reduce those audits and instead focus on more important initiatives, such as improving the production process and improving the worker well-being process. Next slide. So why SLCP? Just a little bit about our history with SLCP. We've been fortunate to be around since the beginning of the initiative. We're a Columbia supplier, and Columbia and Mary Bean encouraged us to join and become a part of the process and serve on committees. So we've been around SLCP for a long time, and we've seen and trusted the development of the tool. We should all recognize that the world's top brands are involved with SLCP. So this is an opportunity to align our internal compliance procedures with these global brands that are so important to our success. And what we've been able to do at Randa is adopt SLCP tools to become an internal standard in our program. So by adopting these tools, it gives us a complete set of standards, e-learning, and training. So this infrastructure that SLCP has created has become a part of our everyday work. The very clear industry-based standards, literature, materials in different languages, and training and e-learning, it's all there and it's all available. But most importantly, it allows us to align our internal efforts to that of our brands. We're accountable to these brands and their standards, and by adopting SLCP, we're able to align our work with our brands so we can focus on factory improvement. Next slide. So through our work with SLCP over the last couple of years, we've been able to achieve a common global standard and alignment. So what we've been able to do for the first time is align both internally and externally. So as a manufacturer, by adopting SLCP, the factories that we work with are now aligned with our RANDA internal standards. And both the factories and RANDA are now aligned with our global brand partners. So this alignment, is critical. Factories and manufacturers such as RANDA have to comply with these brand standards. So, but now all these expectations and standards are understood by all parties. And even more remarkable is because of SLCP's infrastructure, we've been able to complete this process during COVID, which has been a very difficult time for all of us. Next slide. So this year, we're expanding our use of SLCP tools throughout our global ecosystems, factories, suppliers, employees, and brands. What we've been able to do is realign our internal auditing, social auditing, into the SLCP assessment program. I think it's very important to look at the cost benefits of SLCP. So, as in this post-COVID and post-COVID environment, we know money can be an issue. We've all faced significant shutdowns. So we're able to forecast some of the cost savings from audits going forward. And some of our audits, some of our factories have done 10 of these audits a year. So by reducing the number of those, social audits into one SLCP assessment, we're all able to realize significant cost savings. And finally, we are expanding our internal auditor base. And we're using SLCP tools, and we're training our auditors on SLCP standards. Next slide. So that's a little bit about RANDA and how we are using SLCP and what we plan to do with it. So far, we've been fortunate enough to work with over 20 factories through the SLCP assessment process. So in completing the assessment, we've learned that there are a number of issues that factories have to look out for. So let's take a couple minutes and we'll go through the top 5 mistakes that we've seen in working with our factory partners. Number 1, the biggest mistake is not telling everybody in the factory about the benefits of SLCP. So everyone in the factory has to understand that SLCP will reduce the number of social compliance audits that they have to do. So, this sets the whole tone of the process going forward. And it's important to start things off in a positive manner. So the reduction of social audits in a factory is very important. So we have to show them a list, show everyone in the factory a list of all the brands that are using SLCP. This is very important. So secondly with this, we have to make sure that everyone in the factory understands that SLCP is not like a traditional audit. It will be more comprehensive than a traditional social audit, but worth it. It's an opportunity to assess all of a factory's operations and the factory's place in a community. So factories normally, don't have this chance to stop and reflect on where they are. And SLCP can be a big part of that opportunity. Next slide. The second big mistake that we've seen in completing the SLCP self-assessments is not to rush the e-learning training modules. Now, these modules are very important, and what we have to do is we have to learn to take our time in completing these modules. The modules, they have a wealth of learning. So most questions that you might have as a factory are covered in these e-learning modules. It's a great roadmap to completing the assessment process. One thing we found is it's ideal to have 2 or 3 people go through the e-learning modules. If you have 2 or 3 people doing this, everyone will understand the process much more intuitively. The more eyes we have on a problem, the easier it is to solve. Next slide. Number 3, the third big mistake that we've seen, and that is spending time before the assessment to gather information. We've learned that factories should spend time gathering information to complete the self-assessment before they begin. So the more information that we've gathered, the better and easier the process will go in completing the self-assessment. So we've seen quite a few interruptions in completing the self-assessment because factories had to go back over to find the information. So this can cause, time delays and frustration. So if we know this beforehand, we're able to avoid some of these problems. So let's go on to mistake number 4 that we've seen. Okay, the fourth big mistake we've seen with our factories is that they try to complete the process without help if they need it. So instead of guessing about a question, factories have to know that there are resources to guide them. So as you learn about SLCP resources, and there are a lot online, and as well as other types of facility guidance, we have to make sure we share them with the appropriate parties in the factory that will help us complete our self-assessment. I have made this mistake a few times in not talking with factories about getting help and providing them with resources. So I've learned that this resource process is very important and can make things go smoother. And finally, our 5th big mistake. If possible, Sharon just mentioned this, but if possible, avoid the offline entry. So we try using the tool online because there can be some problems, uploading data from the offline tool back online. And Sharon mentioned that a couple of times with savings and the like. So if you can, try to keep the process online to reduce the chance of some data not being uploaded properly. So all sorts of little things can happen here. We want to make sure, that we can avoid some of those issues. So as you can see, there are a number of things to look out for, in completing our SLCP self-assessment. So keep these 5 tips in mind as you start. There's a learning curve involved, but we've learned that at the beginning, it's about guiding everyone in your factory in the right direction and pointing them to the right SLCP resources when they need it. But the great thing is, I promise, it gets easier. We're now to the point where many of the factories that we work with are completing their second SLCP self-assessments. And the process is much smoother. Pretty soon we'll be there. So good luck with SLCP. You'll find that it's a fantastic process and completely worth it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Robert. A glowing recommendation at 4 a.m. your time. I'm very grateful for that. Thank you so much. And maybe I can ask all my guest speakers to now turn on their videos and to see if there are any remaining questions that we can answer between us. I heard from Jack we had over 180 questions coming in through the Q&A. And so Anne mentioned as well that she was typing as a mad woman to make sure to give you all of your answers. But let's see, maybe Jack, can you maybe help us? What is a frequently asked question that maybe we can answer here live? So what is among those 180 questions that you saw coming in? What is a question that was asked multiple times, and let's see if we can help people with that. Jack.
There's a difference between the SLCP.
Okay, that's a good question that I can respond to. So I already mentioned HIG is one of our accredited tools, so one of the platforms where you can fill in the data collection tool. In the session in 2 weeks from now, we will give more details on the platform. Ashoka, may I ask you as well, perhaps, to give some information on HIG? But what I can give in general, as mentioned, on HIG, you can access the SLCP data collection tool. You can fill in the data in FSLM, have it verified in the VFSLM module, and then share your data in the end. HIG, as being one of the accredited hosts, offer also some value-added services on top of the SLCP process. So in HIG, you will find all the questions in the FSLM module that are in the SLCP data collection tool. They provide some additional services as well. Ashoka, is there anything else? I know you are a HIG user as a facility. Anything else that you would like to share on this with our audience?
We use E2 facilities only for FEM, facility environmental model, and we never use the FSLM model, but it's similar to where the operator has FFC used in SLCP proper, and it's similar to the data.
Yeah, that's a good point though, Ashoka, that you're making. So you can actually choose, if you want, FFC as your accredited host, and at the end share that data then with the HIG platform, and it will fill up your VFSLM module. So that is also a good thing to
Well, since last couple of years, even our brands also align with FFC. So already they are in FFC platform like Puma, Adidas, Sandal. We have just added in FFC platforms.
Well, it's good that there are options. Thank you so much for that question, Jack. Anne, is there another question that you would like to highlight?
Yes. Can everybody hear me okay?
We can, go ahead.
So there's been some questions about costs, costs related to HIG and then costs related to the SLCP process. And also numerous questions about how to access this presentation, which would be great if you could, and I've already shared the link. And just also to note that any information that you need, facility guidance, guidance verification protocol, we have numerous documents and numerous training and tutorial, and this can all be found on our resources page on the Zendesk. I'll let you take that away, Sharon.
Thank you so much for that, Anne. So indeed, as Anne just mentioned, if you go to our help desk, we can find numerous resources, like for example, the tool for testing purposes. So again, you have to go to an accredited host to download the tool and to start your assessment. But you can download offline tool for testing purposes from the help desk. And there is as well, as Anne mentioned, the facility guidance document. And in the facility guidance document, was also referenced by Robert, you can find a lot of information on how to go through the SLCP assessment process, including how to increase worker engagement. But let me quickly go back to the question and ask Robert to provide a bit of an answer on the cost as well, because he referenced to it as well. The cost of the SLCP process, so there are numerous resources for free. I just mentioned the help desk. Every bit of information on the help desk is for free. The gateway, which I will tell you more about in 2 weeks' time in the third facility training webinar, is also free of charge. So to create an account on the gateway, which is necessary to start the SLCP process, free of charge. The e-learning that we have available, also free of charge. So a lot of things are free of charge, but of course not everything. We need to invest time in filling in the self-assessment and have it verified. That is the major cost for facilities. So you can compare it to the cost of having a social compliance audit, but it's a little bit more as the tool is bigger than a general social compliance tool. So the major cost for a facility relates to the verification, and there's some minor costs involved as well with filling in the data collection tool on an accredited host. So on an accredited host, you may be charged for filling in the data collection tool. Sometimes it's free as well, but there can be some costs involved there. But maybe Robert, maybe you can also enlighten our audience a bit about costs.
Yeah, what we found is, most of the cost comes in with bringing in a verifying body to, look at the self-assessment. So, the costs vary greatly by geography and provider, but fortunately, there are, quite a few options. You can check in your geography, who those verifiers are. You can, what I would suggest is getting a couple different floats, and then choosing an appropriate body that you feel is best for you. I think the costs are a little more than a traditional social audit, but much worth it because it's much more comprehensive, and we'll be able to share. Will be able to be shared with many different brands.
Thank you so much for that clarification, Robert. I see another question that Anne mentioned to me over the chat is what is the relation between FLA and SLCP, so the Fair Labor Association and SLCP. So I mentioned earlier that there are over 40 brands that are committed to accepting SLCP verified data. So those are the brands. We are, however, also in conversation with different standards for them also to not have their proprietary audits anymore, but to use SLCP verified data to inform their certification. So we're having that conversation, for example, with FLA, we're having that conversation as well with N4 for BSCI. We even have the kind of collaboration agreement and a roadmap for recognition of SLCP verified data in the next years. We also have these conversations with Fair Bear Foundation and Urcotex. And what we're hoping is in the next couple of years, as we're growing with SLCP, that we can also inform you about the different standards that now accept SLCP verified data. I don't know, Kieran, are you with us? Because perhaps from a brand perspective, you can say how the process went within H&M to come to the acceptance of SLCP verified data and to adjust your systems, etc. But I'm not sure if Kieran is here.
I'm here, sorry.
Go ahead, Kieran.
No, I think the process is pretty smooth. Basically, we've been in the teams in the local markets. I've been in touch with all the suppliers. We're trying to give as much as guidance to the suppliers on what the process is. But in terms of the system, and we get the data from the SLCP and so headquarters, and from where we integrate those data into our systems, which gives us the full score for the suppliers. I think it's pretty smooth, and I don't think we have much hiccups there.
Thank you so much for that, Kieran. And I know you came from far. It is to change your entire own compliance program to accept data coming in from the outside. That was quite an effort. So perhaps to add on to that, what we saw, we had our light operation in 2018 where we tested out SLCP, let's say, in Sri Lanka and China, received a lot of feedback, and we actually launched in 2019. In 2019, we had around 500 verified assessments. Then last year we saw an increase, even with the pandemic hitting many countries. We had around 1,500 verified assessments, and this year we're expecting over 4,000 to 5,000 verified assessments. So we've seen this big growth that is in line with as well the work that has been done within a lot of brands to be able to work with SLCP verified data. So it's really good to see this involvement, and we're hoping to continue with, as mentioned, to work with different industry standards as well to accept SLCP verified data. I see we do have a little bit more time. Let me go back to my colleagues. Jack, is there anything else that you think we should be giving an answer to? So any other question that came up multiple times?
So there's a question about the fact that we services in Bangladesh. This is from
Okay. Thanks for that, Jack, because that gives me the opportunity to explain that the SLCP assessment process, that we recommend to go through it once a year. So that you have one set of verified data that's valid for a year, and then within that year you can share it with different partners. So there is not one cycle, let's say, of a brand partner that you are required to follow. What it is more is that you as a facility, so going back to the ownership of the process, you decide when to do the assessment, and then it's you as well that can, and we ask brands as well to accept the verified data that's not older than 1 year old. I don't know, Ashoka, do you have any specific experience with this? So you shared your verified assessment with multiple buyers. Was there any difficulty in sharing your data?
No, we don't found any difficulty to sharing the data. In fact, we share the data to the each facilities have multiple buyers, multiple brands, and we share the same report. And again, it's come to an annual audit. It's about somewhere in September, and again we have to go for an annual audit. It is a 1 year cycle. Even it may be extended 1 or 2 months if it is a different brands or different cycles.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Ashoka. That's very clarifying. There's one thing I can add. So Jackie mentioned that the person asking is from Bangladesh. In Bangladesh, we are currently in what we call a soft launch. So that means that a facility that is not part of the ILO Better Work program, they can sign up on the gateway and start the SLCP assessment process. However, we recommend waiting until the end of May, because that is when the law overlay will be available for Bangladesh as well. So that means there will be additional information within the tool on legal compliance that can really help in answering questions. So let me check now in with Anne for a final question to answer here before I move to closing off this training webinar. Anne, is there any question that I should be answering?
Sure, I was just in the process of typing on that, so maybe we can discuss it. It's asked, is it a fact that the bias audit will be reduced if we enter into the SLCP process? So I started maybe like to answer this, or I just started to say that it depends who the buyer is, it also depends just to double check with the buyer to see what the should be completing the SLCP process because it depends what kind of information they need to do that next code conduct. So trying to come up to know more about that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anne, for that question. So as mentioned, there are over 40 grants that currently are in the process. No, there are over 40 grants that are already accepting SLCP verified data. If your brand partner is not one of those grants, make sure they are aware of SLCP. So we have, again, on our help desk, I've mentioned it several times, but there's a lot to be found there. So slconvergence.org/helpdesk. You can find a template letter for you as a facility to send to a brand partner to inform them about SLCP. To tell them what SLCP is and that you have an SLCP verified data set available. Would like to share that with them and not do an audit for them, and to really clarify what SLCP entails. So I think Robert already mentioned this as a first tip, to really make everyone aware what is SLCP and what are the benefits of it. So maybe, Robert, do you have a tip for facilities if they want to inform their brand partner about SLCP? What is the biggest selling point?
Yeah, well, I think we have to think like a brand and why a brand would want to be a part of SLCP. And I think the important thing is that we have to show as brands how it makes their lives easier with this wonderful infrastructure that SLCP has created. I'd also like to point out that in sharing with brands, we should make sure that we know what step the brands would prefer. Step 1, 2, and 3. That's very important.
Okay, thanks for that, Robert. So indeed what Anne mentioned as well, make sure that you understand which of your brand partners accept SLCP, which step in the tool do they want to have completed, and as mentioned, we have a template there as well to inform them if they're not aware yet of SLCP. I see we're moving towards the final minutes of our webinar. Still questions are coming in the Q&A, and there was one question to clarify what I meant with Bangladesh and INO better work. Well, again, so in Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Vietnam, it is already possible to start your SLCP assessment if you are not in the ILO Better Work program. If you are a facility that is in the ILO Better Work program, you will follow the process with ILO Better Work, and they will make use of the SLCP to respond. But you will follow their timeline and their process. If you're not in the ILO Better Work program, you can start your SLCP assessment, but at this time, this is without additional information about legal questions. So from the end of May onwards, in Bangladesh, Indonesia, and Vietnam, there will also be something called the law overlay, and that is specific guidance on legal questions within the tool. So if you would like to wait for that guidance, as it will give you a lot of good information, please only start your assessment, let's say from June onwards. And if you already want to go ahead, then you can indeed. So let's see. Final question, Jack? Anything that you would like to mention that we should answer to? How many questions did we have in total coming in the Q&A?
Then we have answered 260 questions, and we still have about 10 more. So there's a question about your SLCP and any already system.
Good question. So no, we will not have any scoring at any time. We have have seen that because of SLCP, the
ডাউনলোডটা ভালোই
data
হচ্ছিল
collection
কিন্তু
comes together,
ফ্লেভার মিষ্টি
that a lot of
হ্যাঁ টেস্ট করো
are now also
কেন তোমাকে
saying
পেট খারাপ হবো কি নষ্ট হয়েছে
what is important to me and aligning that more with others as well.
হ্যাঁ দেখো তুমি
So that happens, for example, through the EFSLM scoring.
দাও
And the
আরে তোমার এমনি মজা করলাম তুমি খাও না তুমি একটু খেয়ে দাও এমনি খাবো শুধু খাবো
এমনি টেস্ট করো চিড়া দিয়ে খেতে ভালো লাগে চিড়া দিয়ে
how do they use SLCP
দইয়ের সবই হয়েছে শুধু জিনিসটা জমে নেই তার মানে তোমার দইয়ের প্রবলেম আছে
SLCP verified
দইটাই হয় আমি ঘরে যদি জমে না
facility and then afterwards Robert maybe you can have some as well information about how you use the data within your work. Philip Shoka, go ahead. You first.
So really the scoring matters for here. SLCP you could not provide any scoring. When you share to the brands, SLCP concerned brands, wherever they are the respective SLCP, they from the SLCP verified report, they will take it to their specified reports from the brands and they will give scores. Actually, few brands we have that where SLCP brand has been SLCP verified data has been taken into their pattern and they are given a score about from the yellow to green. Actually, we have increased. So even few buyers have their color coding like green, yellow, like color coding also is there. So they have their own methodology of audit reporting and grading about the facilities regarding this. And we have actually improved the scoring also. So there has been scoring given by brands.
Yeah, I'd like to, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let's go ahead, Robert.
Oh yeah, I just want to reiterate what Ashoka said, is that yes, the brands can score each SLCP assessment according to what's important to them. So scoring will be different depending on each brand and their priorities and where they want to emphasize.
Thank you so much. And maybe Kieran, from a brand perspective, can you give some insight in how you use the data as well?
Yeah, exactly like how Ashok and just said. We do have, like I mentioned when I was speaking, we have focus areas on social. So we have, when we pull out the data from the SLCP data, we look into our focus areas on and try to align it with our scoring system. That's where we get the sustainability index for the suppliers, which drives the business risk.
Okay, I think that's very clear. Thank you so much to specifically to my speakers, to Kieran, Robert, and Ashoka for presenting this webinar together with me. And Jack, thank you so much as well. 216 questions and still counting. That is a lot. We had over 800, almost 900 attendees at some point. So there's a lot of questions that came in. Let me point out finally, before closing off, as mentioned, the help desk again. You can go there at any time to find valuable resources such as the offline tool that you can use for testing purposes, the facility guidance document that has a lot of resources and it really helps you understand the assessment process and how to complete your self-contained assessment. And as well, if you cannot find the answer to your question, there are over 125 FAQs, but still if you can't find the answer to your question, always feel free to submit a request. So Jack, Sahana, or Savage will then be answering your question. So also if, you see there's still a few open questions, if you haven't had the answer to your question, do go to the help desk and submit your question there. We will follow up with an email that will guide you to the help desk as well, where you can find the slides and the recording of today's webinar. But for now, we would like to ask you to give us a little bit of feedback before you go. So you can scan the QR code. We will get to a short questionnaire. It will take only 5 minutes of your time, and it will really help improve the coming facility training organizers. So we would love to hear from you. It will be anonymous, just to hear how did you find the content, was it helpful for you, and do you now feel perhaps more ready to embark on the SLCP assessment process. So please do go here, use the QR code, it will be in the deck as well, but we will share it to you next. But for now, really a big thank you to all of you. This has been the most visited webinar since we started SLCP, so for us it's a great indication to see how we're growing globally and how so many of you are interested. So I really see it as a positive side of not being able to travel and just having rooms where you can have a maximum of, let's say, 100 people. And today we were here with almost 900 people. So thank you so much. And we do hope to welcome you in the SLCP assessment process and that you can benefit from this too. So have a lovely rest of your day, especially for you, Robert, still a long day to go. But also we show back here and the rest in Asia. Have a nice
Thank you.
Thank you also.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, for the opportunity.